So, the European Fan Festival for FF14 took place in Berlin fairly recently. I was there, and it was absolutely amazing, but after listening to the opening keynote, one thing that really stuck with me, which I was both surprised and a little disappointed by, that is that so much time was invested in recapping what was already announced over at North America a few months ago, that when it came to bespoke and unique announcements for EU, there was definitely a strange sense of being stretched a little bit thin. Don't get me wrong, we got some really interesting stuff that I personally wasn't expecting, like the Final Fantasy VII themed 8-man raid series, the entire revamp to the Chocobo companion combat system, which will also allow them to enter dungeons alongside players, and the new tank job Bastion, which I suppose we were all expecting, but I definitely felt a little bit like specifics were being avoided in favour of more vague concepts, quite simply because the final product isn't in a place to show quite yet. That's why I was really excited to see that the press conference, which happens later on in the festivities of FanFest each and every time, took place, and within it contained a wealth of information that I'd argue might even be more exciting than the keynote itself, in part simply because they are far more comfortable to use absolutes and concrete information and answer questions directly. In today's video, I'll be running through the questions at the Q&A that were able to be voiced, as well as Yoshida's answers, and for some of them there might be some commentary here and there based on what I'm feeling about it. So, the first question was, what was the biggest challenge in establishing the visual identity of Evercold so that it immediately felt distinct from Ishgard or Garlemald, despite also being a frozen setting? So next up was Yoshida's answer. In Evercold, due to the theme that we have, you may be thinking of ice and snow, but actually for Evercold we're not really developing any kind of snowy or icy areas, and my commentary here is that he's probably lying. This is something that applies not only to Evercold, but whenever we approach developing a new expansion. When we're thinking about developing new areas, we want to create something that all our players have never been before, somewhere that they wouldn't even imagine. We want to think up areas that we ourselves haven't really experienced or seen before either. So when we go through that process, we really want to have a good think about what kind of scenery there is, what kind of culture there is, and what kind of daily lives we can experience that are really refreshing and something completely new. And then after we've defined that direction, we go about creating the artwork. So we did the same thing this time as well. During our attempt to create this World of the Fourth, this is just something not only for areas, but a challenge that we take on generally whenever we approach a new expansion. This time around, we've been looking at Norse mythology and Nordic culture as a source of inspiration, and really looking around and seeing what kind of old mythology there is that we can draw from. And then we melded that with a fantasy aesthetic. So, I hope you can look forward to it. On a final point regarding some sense of distinction from Garlemald itself, I think Garlemald you would associate with icy, black, dark scenery. Whenever we create new areas, sometimes we do end up with a similar aesthetic. So there are some times where we create these new areas and we think, yeah, it does look a bit like Garlemald, maybe we need to look to a slightly different direction. And now back to me, honestly, my 2 cents are that I actually want more Snowscape, and also more Garlemald. For me, snowy locales are some of the best in FF14, so I'm actually eager to get to revisit them at least a little, assuming what he's saying is a bolt-faced lie and we will get a snowy area. More than that, I feel that Evercold is going to do a great job of the whole varied setting thing, considering their ships each have such separate and bold themings. The next question was, do you have any plans to modernise the housing system in FF14 going forward? And this one is interesting. Yoshida said, oh yes, I think this question has maybe been refined. It's a little bit vague, a little bit more ambiguous. I get the feeling that you really want to ask, well, World of Warcraft has come up with this amazing housing system. How about FF14? And then he asks who gave the question, and says, I think that must be what you really wanted to ask. I'm sure for all those journalists and creators out there who have been with us on this journey for a long time, back from the time of A Realm Reborn, I think you would know that we have an immense respect for the World of Warcraft team. So when we saw that the World of Warcraft team announced the new expansion and this new housing system, and they said specifically that they looked to FF14 and incorporated things which they wanted to surpass us on, I think that in itself is very much a sense of great honour for us to hear. And, of course, I had some hands-on with the WoW housing system myself, and I really do appreciate it. It's amazing. We always like taking on new challenges, so this time around, when I tried WoW's housing, I thought this is really amazing, and it's been such a good source of research, so I can't say exactly when it will happen, but what I can say is that for the patch 8.x series we are planning 2 very big overhauls for housing. The first one of these updates involves the UI. I do appreciate that right now, the UI in FF14 is quite technical, and it's not very accessible. So what we want to do is have a major overhaul of that UI so that it is more accessible for casual players so that they can easily create elaborate housing layouts. As for the second major update that we have planned, unfortunately I'm not able to provide any details right now, but I think you'll probably be much happier to hear about what it is compared to the UI update. It's currently in the planning process right now on our end. There is a higher chance that it will get released earlier than the UI update. Once we have a better idea of when we can provide this update, we will announce further details. So once again, I actually cannot say any specific details right now, but I think once we're able to share those details, it's probably the number one thing on the list that a lot of people are requesting. For me, great news. I think a game that lasts is one that is willing to learn from the successes of its peers, whilst also retaining what makes it itself so strong. FF14 has often failed in that regard, I feel. They do so much right, but what they do wrong often stays wrong. I can't wait to see what they cook up, and I really hope it is a version of instanced housing that can ignore the lottery system, alongside housing usability and UI updates. Was Bastion inspired by any jobs from older Final Fantasy games? Yoshida said that this is not just limited to Bastion, but whenever we want to implement a new job in FF14, of course, there are cases where there are things like the Red Mage and Pictomancer which have a connection to previous Final Fantasy titles. But the most important thing for us is that we are consciously paying attention to making sure that the job is engaging and fun to play in FF14. So when we thought about which next new job to put in FF14, this time we thought, okay, we need to put in a new tank job, and we decided on Bastion, but it was not related to the previous Final Fantasy titles because more than anything, we wanted to ensure that whatever direction we did go in would be engaging and fun for the players. The next question carried on from this, saying that I understand more detailed information about the new job Bastion will be revealed in the future, but could you explain its overall concept and how it differs from the other tank jobs? In particular, I'm intrigued by the inclusion of ranged attacks as part of its combat kit. Yoshida said that, so I can see, it says here that it has inclusion of range attacks as part of its combat kit. Well, in that regard, I think you could also look to Paladin, which also has ranged attacks, but I think maybe one of the benefits of Bastion is that it can shoot. So it does have a good combination of close ranged attacks and then attacks which can be done from afar. So with those shooting abilities, it can be useful in certain encounters. I did mention this in the keynote presentation as well, but one of the key appeal points of Bastion is that in its toolkit it does have a good recovery and guard ability as well. So as a main tank, you can instantly apply those effects to a party member, but the key thing about Bastion is that you can also do it at a timing of your liking. So you can look to what the boss is going to do, and then based on the boss's timeline, decide when would be the most optimal time to apply that recovery or guarding ability for your party members. So I think that's a key point. Of course, there is a good range of attacking skills as well in the toolkit, but this is another aspect of the job that you can take into account. So for me, I talk more about this in detail in another video I released yesterday, so whilst I'm sorry for the shameless plug, you can head over there if you want to see my more in-depth thoughts about this. I've linked it in the description below. The next question asked about the off-tank and main tank role, and they said that you're splitting the tank role into defined main tank and off-tank roles in Evercold. How rigid will that definition be? Will tanks be able to easily switch between the two, or is it time for warriors across Eorzea to learn how to play off-tank? Yoshida said, "I think maybe there is some misunderstanding. So just to clarify, in Reborn mode there is no clear distinction between main tank and off-tank. That clear difference is only applied in Evolved mode." I think there's a bit of sarcasm mixed in there, but to hear this question about whether it's time for warriors across Eorzea to learn to play off-tank, that does bring a little bit of pain to my heart. We do get similar feedback from Dark Knights as well, and when we do get that feedback, it sits similarly. It hurts me to hear. Of course, in those cases, you have to decide between yourselves who's going to be the main tank and off-tank, and we are designing it so that it is fun to play as an off-tank. So I hope that people will look forward to it. Having said that, I don't think there's any kind of preparation you need to do in advance. The reason being is that this new system we're introducing is going to start in 8.0, and the only kind of real situations where you need main tank and off tank is really in higher end content. So starting from Savage or higher difficulty content. In those kinds of raids, it would be great if you could experience those new battles. By going through those new battles as well, we learn to make mechanics for the content. So I hope that first, you'll just play as usual, and then provide your feedback and talk amongst yourselves as well. For me, finally, we really needed to hear this from the horse's mouth to prevent the Doom posters, if I'm being honest. These things are never truly, strictly clear-cut in FF14, and always do offer some kind of leniency and choice based on player comfort and capability. You can play double shield, and it's even good in some cases, for example. Whilst this isn't necessarily a one-for-one comparison, and we don't have the foundation to be able to say so, I feel it's the best we can do right now until we hear more and get to grips with it ourselves. Tanks are going to be fine, and we shouldn't overreact until we know for sure. With the content you're currently developing, where do you feel the team is being the most bold? So Yoshida says, so of course we have the keynote here in Berlin, but right now we're hard at work on a lot of content, and we really are doing our best to incorporate many different revisions and many different changes. And for this question to come up to us, what is the most bold? It's quite tough to just single one thing out. It's a difficult one to answer. They have a little back and forth, and they clarify that it is specifically about content, and then Yoshida gets into his real answer. He says, I think in terms of content, there are the two raids that we're working on. First, there's the Evangelion crossover, Ghosts of Desire, that we're currently developing, and then we also have the next crossover, which is with the Final Fantasy VII Remake series, the Beyond the Lifestream raids. For both of these raids, we've placed a lot of importance on the story, and we've worked really hard to ensure that the story will be engaging for players. But also, we've equally put a lot of attention and effort into the boss battles as well. In particular, this applies more to Evangelion, but because Evangelion is such a different world, we've approached how do we fuse those two completely different worlds together and form a cohesive story with it. I think this is a very big challenge that we've been taking on. We are working very closely with Kara Inc., and it's been a lot of fun working together with them, but equally, I think it's also been a very big challenge and we are really enjoying it. There's also another type of content which we announced today. In the development team, we are tentatively calling it World Raids, but this is a new type of content which you will be able to play on the public fields. This is also a very big challenge that we're taking on. And it just so happens that the person in charge of driving the development of this content is Mr. Ozma, who also worked on Beastmaster, who did the presentation today. He's also the person who created Eureka as well. I think he really is drawing out his rich experience and making the most of it to develop this new content, which you will be able to enjoy on the fields. This is not implementing in 8.0, but I don't think it would take anything longer after that. So, I hope you look forward to new information when we're ready to announce it. And by the sounds of that, he seems to be talking about an 8.1, 8.2 style release schedule. Mr. Ozma is my goat, to make it clear. He spent the last handful of months working away at developing Beastmaster, which he took the lead for, and before that, He was known for developing some of the hardest and most memorable battle content in FF14 history. It seems that next, he'll be taking the lead on developing world bosses for Evercold, and if I am to be totally honest, there isn't anybody else I'd rather see take the reins on this. I'm really hoping they take some serious cues from Guild Wars 2 in a lot of aspects to the open world for the expansion going forward, while still retaining what makes FF14 battle content best in class. Are there any challenges you want to take with Evercold and the content that will be releasing following it? Yoshida says, well, yes, if this question is about taking on challenges, well, right from A Realm Reborn, I think both me and the development team have been constantly taking on challenges for FF14, and it's just been a constant process. So if we were to think about any challenge in particular, I think it really is just creating content and doing our best effort to increase the number of players in FF14. Whether that would be doubling the amount of players, making it 3 times as many, 5 times as many, or pulling in 10 times as many players. It's just our desire to deliver FF14 to as many people as possible. Of course, for example, previously in Anaheim and today in Berlin, I did talk about many different things. When I go up on stage, I may look really confident and I'm saying, we're going to release this thing, we're going to change this thing, we're going to create this thing. I may look confident there, but whenever we're talking about challenges, it's inevitable that when taking on a challenge there is always the possibility of failure. And at the end of the day, we are only human as well. So we could end up with certain situations where maybe there is a balancing mistake or there are system bugs. Whenever we do take on challenges, we always encounter the possibility of running into these kinds of failures or slip-ups. So, yes, when do we face these risks? When it comes to the question about why are we still determined to take on those challenges? Well, I think it counts both for me and also the rest of the Final Fantasy XIV team, but more than anything, what we want is just for all of our players to enjoy the game more. And the only way we can do that is if we take on these challenges so that we can provide you with more amazing experiences. So, when I return back to Japan, yes, I'm going to feel pressure because I do want to continue working hard to ensure that we can reach that goal. But I think the only way we can alleviate whatever sense of unease that we have, the only way of pushing through that is just to continue putting in hard work, putting in the effort, and then that is what drives us forward. They then shift and start talking about the new Chocobo system by asking, could you tell us the reasoning and goals behind making such a significant update to the companion Chocobo system at this point in time? And one thing I want to make clear, the answer here is really interesting on a more broad spectrum. In Evercold, I have announced that it's not only for the companion Chocobos, but we are looking to various systems when looking to make updates. Truth be told, we did not intend to incorporate this companion Chocobo update only because we have 8.0 down the road. The order is actually reversed. So originally, we have the release of 7.0, and then it was just around the time that we finished development on patch 7.1, and we were starting development on patch 7.2. And I was looking to think about how would I incorporate the game design moving forwards to 8.0. I was working on that myself. When I was going through these deliberations, I was really torn. But as was mentioned in the previous question about taking risks, I thought that more than anything, in order to ensure that we can move forward and aim higher in Final Fantasy XIV, then we would need to evolve. So back at that time, broadly speaking, I did 3 things. The first one was from my perspective as producer and director. I looked at the game and I thought personally about what I felt we absolutely needed to change, and I listed all of those things by myself. The second thing that I did, and this was not only including me, but it was me and core members of the FF14 team. There was Assistant Director Yokozawa, who most recently directed the Heavyweight and Heavyweight Savage raid tier, Battle Director Sato, and there was also Mr. Ozma and several others. It was really just a handful of core members on the FF14 team. We sat down together and we had a really long discussion about how should we change the game design. This discussion spanned hours and hours. The third thing involved an even bigger group of people. Specifically, it was the previous Final Fantasy XIV development team, and then the current development team, the operations team, the marketing team, promotions team, PR team. We went through all of those teams, and I asked them, what would you change about Final Fantasy XIV? And they gave me this huge list. I consolidated all of those separate lists together, and then we had to decide, okay, what are we going to do and what aren't we going to do? And when would we do it? So I went and assigned a priority order for each of those things, and through that process it was decided that for the companion Chocobos, we should do that sooner rather than later. So when you look at the PR campaign for 8.0, you might be thinking that we're just focusing on the 8.x series, but what we really want to do is also look at Final Fantasy XIV as a whole and see what kind of evolution we can give it. So, this includes the 8.x series, as I already announced some big things coming in 8.1 and 8.2. But what we want to do is further evolve the game moving forward as well, and continually providing those big updates. And this would happen right up to the run-up to 9.0, but we wouldn't just stop there. We would still want to continue evolving again, even further. And now back to me. I have so many questions about firstly the Chocobo system personally, and I feel that honestly, this answer speaks more about the open communication Square Enix is attempting to put at the forefront going forward, rather than the Chocobo system itself. I find this very promising. So many people in the global FF14 team are dedicated players, endgame raiders, crafters, people who are actively and socially involved in the game and more, and they really do have a good understanding of the pulse of the community as well as what people want, enjoy and dislike. I've seen that firsthand. Knowing that they have been brought into the conversation makes me feel positively about the future, honestly. But this system could be really great, going back to the Chocobo system. The issue is that right now it's just kind of superfluous words. We really need substance to truly understand its potential. Did the community reaction to Chort take you by surprise? Naoki Yoshida responds, honestly speaking, I just don't know why this is such a thing. How many people asked about Chort? Oh, there's a few. I am really glad to hear that Chort is so well received, but honestly thinking I just couldn't really understand. Like, what is the appeal of Chort? Of course, we do understand that he's very popular and there have been many memes, but really I just couldn't understand. Like, just why? So if anything, I would like to hear from your perspective. But, oh, I should say though, I did see that there was also news coverage about Chort, so thank you very much for writing that as well. I can understand maybe a little bit. I mean, this is some huge, bulky guy, and then suddenly, well, he's standing there and then he like rolls. So from that perspective, I can kind of understand. But yes, when these kind of things happen, and the player community picks it up on social media and they combine various things, they create their own memes. When these kind of things happen for us, it's really great for us to see because we are involved in creating this entertainment and it's really fun for us. So if people in the community also find some unexpected points of appeal in any content that we produce moving forward, do please make your voices heard, because the development team is looking at all of the responses on social media. We very much do enjoy looking at them, and we do have smirks on our faces when things like this happen. The next question is a bit more nostalgic. The questioner asks, how did you cultivate a fanbase that loves to sit through almost 3 hours of Keynote like a B2B audience? The first thing Yoshida does is he asks for a show of hands to see how many of the people in the audience have been around since 1.0 or around Reborn, and he thanks them for sticking around for so long. And then he says, I think the situation around Square Enix back at that time was not so good. I remember I went around traveling and saying hello to the media, and I was told by the media that Square Enix was this secretive company and they don't really tell us that much. As a director from Square Enix, I was told from people in the media that was the first time they've met a director who actually says so much and provides so much information. And this was not only when I was talking to members of the media, but to the players as well. So I thought it's really important to be honest and upfront. So if we failed, we should explain why did we fail. If we decide to do something and we decide it's necessary, we should explain why it's necessary and also how would we achieve it. And if we do get requests which we cannot address, then we should also explain the reasons behind that as well. So I thought it's very important to be upfront and honest about why we do the things we do, and I've been doing that for 16 years. So this applies not only to us on the development team, but also to the players, the player community, and also the media. I like to think of it that we are not separate entities, but rather we are all together as one community. And I think this process of us being transparent and engaging together in order to gain a mutual level of understanding is what's helped cultivate this fan base together. Whether it be something really minor about FF14, or whether it's a major piece of content, whenever there is something that needs to be talked about, I'd love for us to talk about it together and for us to get excited together as we work on FF14. So, of course, we do want to continue maintaining a good relationship with the media, but also equally with our players, and continuing to engage proactively so that we can further consolidate and strengthen our relationship together and move forward as one. But on a final note, I do also think that an almost 3-hour keynote is a little bit too long, so I do promise you moving forward I will be more attentive with my timekeeping. They then shifted over to discussing the Final Fantasy VII collaboration raid beyond the livestream, by asking which team approached the other one first. Yoshida responds, "The first person to approach the other team? Well, I was the first person to do the approach. As you all know, right from A Realm Reborn, the main concept of FF14 is that we want to provide a sort of Final Fantasy theme park for our players. So right from the beginning, we've always had many requests to have some sort of big collaboration with other titles, whether it be costumes or characters making an appearance. But I'm a member of the board, and I knew that the Final Fantasy VII Remake series was in development, and I knew that more than anything, what the fans would be anticipating is that they just want the FF7 Remake series to be released as fast as possible. And that's also something that I wanted myself, because personally, I'm also a fan of 7. It's for this reason that I thought I didn't want us to take a half-baked approach with a crossover, because I didn't want to distract the FF7 Remake team from their hard work. And it's for that reason that I thought we really need to decide on when we would do the crossover. The timing would be really important. But now, Final Fantasy VII Revelation has been announced, and the development team is doing their last push for development, so they're really picking up the pace and doing their final push to release the game. So, I thought now would be a good opportunity for us to do a big collaboration with the FF7 Remake series, and with both titles collaborating together, we could work together to generate more excitement and hype around the franchise as a whole. I had a discussion with Hamaguchi-san about this, and I also talked to Kitase-san as well, and we decided that this would be a good timing, and we are going really big with this collaboration, and both teams are putting in their best efforts. How do you ensure new players will have a great experience going from the beginning of A Realm Reborn to Evercold? Will there be changes to fasten or alter the new player experience? Depending on playstyle, it can easily take around 300 hours just playing through the story. This is a question we've been getting for a long time right from the beginning. We are considering 2 things to address this. The first one is something that we will carry out at or before Evercold's release timing. The second one involves a system, but we are currently reviewing the possibility of this. So right now, what we're still considering is its feasibility and addressing the question about whether or not we would be able to introduce the system. And for these things that I'm talking about, there is a non-zero possibility of us being able to implement it for 8.0. So there is a possibility that we could make it. So I do appreciate that back at the time of A Realm Reborn, I had previously said that I do want players to enjoy the story. So I would like them to have a fresh experience right from A Realm Reborn. But now that we're at this point, we have begun thinking about accommodating these kind of requests. And I think from the 2 things that I've hinted at here, one of them at least, you might be able to know more about at the Tokyo Fan Fest. But I think you can think positively about it. I do apologise for the ambiguity, but I would be very much appreciated if you can convey to your reader base that I'm thinking very positively about the possibility of incorporating something and accommodating those requests. So first of all, new starting point for the MSQ, potentially. Baked-in skip potion when you create a character as an optional thing. Maybe consolidating down some of the MSQ from all of the expansions into the most essential part, and then making a second MSQ track for the quote-unquote non-essential bits. I have no idea what they're talking about in specifics, but I feel like we are along those lines. You mentioned on stage that you started with Final Fantasy XIV when you were 37, and now you're 53. How has your approach to the game's development changed in that time? Does retirement ever cross your mind, or do you remain committed to the game's development? And let me read this answer. So, when it comes to the question about whether my basic approach or mindset of game development has changed, essentially speaking, nothing has changed. I've given a lot of interviews about this topic, and there have been various development-focused interviews, so I have provided long answers in the past. So, I'll omit some details, but essentially speaking, my fundamental approach has not changed. That said, with time, the approach for game design does need to change, because it's not necessarily the case that good game design in the past would be appropriate for today and would still be as fun and engaging today. Sometimes there are cases where a game design approach that would have worked in the past wouldn't necessarily be appropriate with how the times have changed. This applies to FF14 as well. It changes the way that I think about how we go about designing things in FF14, but it would also apply to working on any other title other than FF14. So I think in a sense there is one approach where I've kind of upgraded my own personal mindset. In Japan, there is something that we call it a time progression battle. And of course in these modern times as well, people have less time that they can use. They have less free time on their hands. So we really need to think about what would be fun and what would be engaging based on these new conditions that we have. That in itself is a challenge, but I also think it's very fun working in this kind of new situation that we have. And I have not once thought about retiring. If Square Enix comes to me and goes, well, we no longer need you, then I guess I'll go. Because after all, I wouldn't really feel motivated to work at a place where they say they don't need me. But of course, hypothetically speaking, if I was to leave Square Enix, of course, right now I'm 53, and in Japan, starting from the age of 60 you can retire, but still, actually I would continue developing games. I might work with a close-knit team of my own friends and we would gather funds together and develop titles together. And as for FF14, I've previously said this to all our players, but FF14 really is my life's work. So as long as the FF14 players don't go and say, hey, Yoshida, you've got to quit, I do intend to continue working on the title. And the last question of the day pertains to character customization. They ask, today you revealed more character customization, including the ability to remove certain markings and changeable horns across races. You mentioned that you've been relaxing your views on lore accuracy, and we've already seen that through unlocking glamour restrictions earlier this year. What has caused you to change your attitude towards this? Yoshida says, so yes, I do think that there have been some changes. As a game developer, I think it's our responsibility to come up with the lore, the world, and the rules of the game, and then to provide that to the players. Because of that, I think from a creative perspective, we are really particular about how we want that world to be. So, of course, we do understand that players may provide their own requests, but when it comes to the question about why we would not want to implement those things, well, let's take, for example, the Mikote. The Mikote are a hunter tribe and a warring tribe, so it's only natural that they would have their war makeup. And previously, I said that we would not remove that war makeup from the Mikote. In the past, we did receive feedback from the players. They were like, yeah, we want to turn it off. We want this makeup off. But I refused because I said, these are the rules of the world we provided, and this is the lore behind the race, and it was for this reason why we have not previously allowed that. But when it comes to this lore, and being very particular about the lore, I thought to myself that this can also be considered an aspect of roleplaying, and in that regard I kind of upgraded my own mindset and my approach to it. So, in FF14, we have the Mikote, and as announced in patch 8.1 there will be the option to remove the makeup or switch it off. But as a player myself, if I'm playing with a Mikote, I would personally not turn it off. The reason being is that I love the lore behind the game and the unique characteristics of each race. But when it comes to the question of following that lore and being really loyal to that lore, I think it's not really a question of good or bad, but now I begin to think that it's more of a question of how particular you are about that aspect, and that's more tied into role-playing. We have millions of players, and even if there was just one player who was really particular about that, and they would lose that option to have that design in the way that they prefer, I thought this wasn't really the direction that we want to take, but rather that we want to give the choice to players. So, for those players who are really particular about how they want to present their characters, then we can provide that choice to them. So now, they have that option, and that formed the basis of this approach I'm taking. So, for those players who are really particular about the lore and they're thinking to themselves, oh, Yoshida, this change is such a shame, if they're like me and they really want to be particular about how their character is represented, then they can just do the same as me and make sure that the display is switched on. So we want to provide that choice to the players, and we don't want to force the players down any particular route. So really, it's just providing that option for the players so they can be particular about what sorts of roleplay they want to do. That was a choice that I made as a game designer, and I wanted to provide that option to all of our players. I think this Q&A session was actually really something, and that we got far more of a look at Yoshida's direct thoughts on various topics related to the keynote. For me, I want more of this. Less curated superfluous nothing, less marketing buzzwords, and more of just the team talking about the game they're so very passionate about, and sharing anecdotes as they continue to create and innovate on it, even over a decade later.